Welcome back, DIY friends. Today I'm going to be doing a complete brake replacement on my 2003 Outback travel trailer. Like most travel trailers, it's equipped with electric brakes that you may find on any kind of trailer out there. This is a very common job. Matter of fact, this size is very common. This is a 10-inch by 2.5-inch setup. And the problem I'm having is that I'm getting a short circuit message on my brake controller, and I've narrowed it down to either being the magnet on the brakes that allows the system to work, or it's the wiring underneath the camper. I'm going to cover that in a separate video. But today we're going to replace the brakes, mainly because these magnets are 16 years old. They're really quite worn out. As you can see here, what happens is these start to wear down, and that actually causes a short circuit error in the brake controller. I think this may be the culprit. Even if not, they're 16 years old. It's time for them to go. So today we're going to replace this entire assembly, and I'll show you how. So come along for the ride. Stay tuned. So the first thing we'll need to do is get off these grease caps so we can get the brake drum off the assembly. So let's get that going first, and here's how you do it. I'm going to take a rubber mallet, but you could use any hammer carefully. You just kind of pound it from side to side, and this will come off. There it is. And what you're dealing with here is what they call a castle nut. It's a nut that's got little gouges in it, and it's kept in place by a metal cotter pin right here that we're going to need to remove now. Chances are you're going to destroy it getting out, especially if you've got a setup like mine where the pin goes at an angle off to the side. There's really no good way to get it out. You just got to kind of get some pliers and just rip it out of there. Your local hardware store, auto parts store, and Harbor Freight will have replacement cotter pins. I've got some of those before I started my job to replace this with. And there it is. Once you get the cotter pin off, the castle nut usually spins off really quite easily. These are not supposed to be really torqued down tight in the first place, or you'll destroy your wheel bearings. Once you get it loose, it should just spin right off. All right, once you get that nut off, there's a washer right behind it typically. Here's what that looks like. And then your outer wheel bearing will come out right here. We're going to clean that in the next step. And the next thing you'll need to do, if you can get it, the drum can be kind of tough to get, is you have to just keep wiggling it and pulling it until it'll come loose. It will come loose eventually, but you might have to get a screwdriver back here and pry this to get it out. There it comes. Now on the inside of here is the inner wheel bearing. We're going to need to pop that out with a wheel bearing removal tool, or if you don't have one, you could possibly use a big screwdriver to get that out, as long as you have a replacement seal to replace that with, because you will ruin it getting it out of there. So there's what it looks like once you got all the grease wiped off. Here's the seal that we're going to try to pop out of there and set that bearing free. I'm going to use this wheel bearing removal tool to pop it out of there and just lightly bump it with a hammer. You just got to get this up underneath the bearing and then put pressure on it to release it. Okay, so there you go. I got it loose. As you can see, that first whack when it was really tight pretty much destroyed the seal, so you're not going to reuse that. You got to order these and have them ready. Once you get that off, you can reach inside, and then here is your inner wheel bearing seal. We're going to be cleaning both of these bearings now and get them nice and clean and repack them with grease before we start reassembly. So let's do that now. Okay, so after wiping these bearings off as best as I can with a paper towel, I'm going to put them into a coffee can with a couple of inches of paint thinner in there. I'm going to swish them around and brush them up and clean them as best as I can. Try to get all that old grease out of there so we can repack them, get them ready for the new grease. Okay, now that I've got my bearings all cleaned up with paint thinner, I shook them out really good, spun them, really worked them with the brush to get all the grease out, and I blew them out with an air gun. You can set them out to air dry if you don't have an air gun, that's fine. You want to visually inspect them for any signs of discoloration or dark burn spots. These seem to be okay. They're really not, there's no signs of any physical damage, no signs of really any burns. They spin freely, so I'm going to go ahead and put them back on the camper. Unfortunately, you don't know if you're going to need to replace these until you actually get the brake drum off and you can see them. So what I did out of an abundance of caution is I carry a spare inner and outer bearing in my camper at all times in case I break down on the road and I need them. So I do have them here. If I had to replace them, I could, but I don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and re-grease these and use them again. So we're going to set these aside now, and the next thing we're going to concentrate on is we're going to be taking off this entire brake assembly. Instead of trying to rebuild this, because it is 16 years old and there is substantial wear on the magnet here. As you can see, the little dots, the little warning dots have ground all the way down to nothing here, and I think that could potentially be a problem or part of our short circuit problem on our braking system. It's better, instead of just getting new shoes or replacing the brake, you know, for the cost you can get this whole assembly for sometimes, depending on who you buy from, even less than just buying the parts. And there's 4 bolts on the back of here, and this whole assembly will just come right off. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get to work on that. So my camper has got the Alco 10-inch 3,500 pound axles, and is probably typical with a lot of campers. Same exact setup. You're going to have 4 nuts on the back, and then this whole assembly will come off. This camper has 11/16 nuts on it. We're going to go ahead and take them off. Here we go. Really not too bad considering these have been on here for 16 years. So once you've got those 4 bolts removed, the last thing you're going to have to do is disconnect the electrical magnetic brake wires coming out of the camper. In this case, the 2 green wires are coming from the magnet on the brake side of my camper, and then the black wires are the power source and the distribution leads. So I need to cut these green leads to set this thing free. So let's do that now. All right, those wires are free. Let's get the unit off. All right, with all the nuts in the back and the wires free, you can just simply grab the whole assembly and just take it straight off. You can see what we were dealing with in the back there, which actually, considering how old this was pretty good. Those nuts came off really without a fight at all. But here it is, the entire assembly ready to be replaced. All we have to do now is clean up this axle hub, and we can reinstall the new assembly. Okay, now that we've got the old brake assembly off of the camper, I'm going to prep the new assembly to go back on. As you can see, these assemblies, when you buy them, come with everything that we just took off the camper. Brand new magnet, shoes, hardware, it's all literally brand new, right down to the wires coming out the back where we can make our connection to go back onto the braking system. What I'm going to do, instead of just throwing this on, is I'm going to lube this up just a little bit. There on each shoe there are 3 points that the shoes rub on as you apply the brakes. And I'm just going to put a little bit of white grease underneath each of those 3 points on both shoes. If you look carefully, you'll see a raised and flat spot on the backing plate where that is. Just look for that, slide a little grease under there. And moving right along with our preparation to reassemble the brake assemblies, our 2 bearings are now nice and clean because we cleaned them earlier. We need to repack them with fresh grease. I'm going to use a multi-purpose high-temp wheel bearing grease that you can get from your local auto parts store. There's really no glorious way to do this unless you have this cool little tool that's made for it, but hey, I'm old school and this works just fine. Just grab globs of it in your hand and squish it real hard, push it through the rollers, and then this big crack up on the back of the bearing is a great place to just push it in there and just keep pushing and doing that. Go all the way around each bearing. Be really generous with this. You can't put too much grease in there, so just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Scrape it back out and keep doing that and go all the way around both bearings. There you have it, 2 freshly packed wheel bearings. And time for a glove change. Okay, so my wheel bearings are all greased and packed. I went ahead and cleaned up the inside of my hub where everything's going to go back together to make sure that's clean before we reassemble. I've got my new rear bearing seal here. I'm going to put that in. So we're going to first start with taking the old bearing, and I'll just take a finger full of grease, and I'm just going to pre-lubricate that inner race area that this bearing is going to ride on. Make sure it's got something to cushion it once it starts rolling again. And another thing I like to do is also just put a little bead of grease around the outside, because this is going to press in, and that's the surface that's going to be under tension as it goes and is forced back into the drum. It's a very, very tight fit. So you don't want to put a lot of this because that can actually hinder that, but I'm just going to put a light coat on everything there. And then also the inner area here is going to seal. I'm going to put a little grease on that. So I think that will help it seal as well. So skinny side down, goes back in where it came from, only it's nice and clean now. This has got a thin layer on it. We'll put that down in there. And then the way I'm going to tamp this back down in, first I'm going to set it, be real careful to set it as flat as I possibly can. It looks pretty much dead on. I'm going to take a piece of wood. I've got a 4x4 in this case, and I got a hammer. And I'm just going to put that on top of there, and I'm going to ever so carefully tap it down. Take a look, make sure nothing's going crooked, tap it again. Keep looking, looks pretty good. I think we're good. 2 taps. It's nice and straight, so I'm going to go ahead and drive it home till it stops. All right. Just check it. There you go. It's all back together. It's got a fresh bearing on there. We're going to clean up the inside of the drum now with brake cleaner before I put it back on the camper. Okay, so when you weren't looking, I went ahead, since I had all this apart, I went ahead and kind of hit it with brake cleaner and a wire brush and just put a light coat of paint on all the suspension components that were back there and also on this backing plate. I'm not going to really get a chance to get to that again, probably for a very long time, maybe never. So it didn't hurt to just get some spray on there. Not trying to win any car shows or anything, just clean it up and get some paint on there. It'll kind of knock down the rust from happening. So now we're going to bolt the new assembly onto the backing plate. Just do the reverse of what you saw. I'm really thankful that the kit that I ordered also came with brand new nuts and also included lock washers, which my factory installation did not have. So I've got all that. Just going to take those 4 bolts and put them back on. The new unit does come with brand new studs, so everything that secures this to that backing plate will be new, including the nuts and lock washers. So let's get to that now. And as you can see, the last thing I do is I tap them with a rubber mallet just to kind of drive them home that final little extra. They are definitely on there tight. They're not going anywhere. And we'll do a little final cleaning on the brake drum before we install it. Okay, with the drum clean and everything ready to go back together, we will do just that. I'm going to put a little grease back here on that back seal edge where the seal is going to rotate, try to help it seal better. And I'm going to prep the spindle a little bit by putting a little bit of grease on the 2 places where the bearings are going to roll, which is going to be right here and also right here in this raised 45-degree angle edge there. That's where that outer bearing is going to ride. And once again, can't put too much grease on with these things. It's pretty hard. And then I'm going to take our drum, slide it on real carefully. Just try to dead center it. Give it a little turn as you go in. And that's on. All right, the final part of our assembly is going to be to get this outer wheel bearing in. Once again, I'm going to take a little bit of grease pre-lubricate that outer race that the bearing rides on, so it's got some grease when we get this thing rolling again. All right, our bearing is all packed from when we did that earlier. It's ready to go in. Push it in until it seats flat and neatly. Put your washer back in. And lastly, your castle nut. Let's put that on there. So here's a really important step, and there's different schools of thought on this. I'll tell you what I've done for decades, and it's always worked well for me. You don't want to over tighten the castle nut and put too much pressure on those bearings because you'll burn them up. That's a fact, and that's indisputable. How much pressure you put on here, a little bit of debate. Some people like to preload this and put a certain amount of pounds on it and then back it off. I've found that what works for me as a backyard mechanic with no special tools or devices is to keep tightening this until you get the wiggle out of the bearing. So I'm going to do that first. And you can see that wiggle's just gone now. If I back it off a little bit, you can hear it clunking. Right about there, it just stops. So what the objective is, you've got to put this cotter pin back in, and I'm going to put it back through the slot in this castle nut that allows me to get the closest I can to that point where I can turn this, and this just stops knocking. So let's find the hole for that cotter pin, which I believe is right here. So there it is. So I think I'm in a good spot right there. I've got no wiggle in it, and I've just turned it enough to where it doesn't move anymore. So I'm going to tap that cotter pin in right there and call it good. And then lastly, you just want to take this cotter pin and bend it in both directions so it doesn't come undone. Once again, I like to take the screwdriver and lay it on there and just tap it. That kind of drives it home. And that's not going anywhere. And last step, clean this up already, just tap your grease cap back on. Just like that wheel bearing seal, make sure it's nice and straight, and just gently just go around the edges. And that's pretty much done. Now the last thing left to do is adjust the brakes. So what I'm going to do next underneath the camper is adjust the brakes. And to access the adjustment screw, there's a pair of little seals right here on the back of this. Most campers, the forward one is going to be the one where your adjustment screw is, and I know this because I've looked at this one on my bench already. So just going to pop this little cap off, and then you can get right down in that hole and you can reach in there, and there's a little wheel with a gear, and you can just turn it to adjust your brakes. What we're going to do, because my brakes are brand new, they're adjusted in, and I need to move them out a little bit till they start to touch the surface of the drum, and then that'll be a good spot for them to start braking and working properly. So we're going to go into the camper now and get that done. It's a really wonky process. Just getting the right spot on that wheel where it will turn is kind of funky. And to my misfortune, I've also got a bottle jack right in front of me, so this is even harder. I just keep turning the screw until I can start to hear the shoes rubbing more on the drum. Which we're not hearing much yet, so I'll just keep going till I start to hear them touch. Okay, so now that I've got it adjusted enough where I can just turn the drum like this, and it gets about a turn or so, and then stops, I'm going to do my final adjustment with the wheel on to dial it in even closer. So let's do that next. Okay, so even though I adjusted the brake drum so it only spins about one time when I spin it, you'll see the difference when you put the actual wheel on and you give it a fairly firm little turn. You see that wheel is going to turn over. That's turning about 2 or 3 times. What I'd really like for is it to go about 1 time and hear the brake pads touching the drum. So that's what I'm going to keep adjusting and accomplish next. And now, after my final adjustment, here's how it looks when I give it a good firm spin. That was pushing really hard. It's really going about a turn and a quarter. I can hear those shoes touching the drum, so I know they're right there. When the electric brakes are applied, they're going to be able to stop the camper. All right, friends, so that's a wrap for this video. Our job here is done. Well, at least this video it's done. I've still got more wheels to do, but you've come along for the ride for one, and hopefully you found that helpful if you decide to tackle this job on your own camper or your utility trailer. It really is pretty much the same on just about any trailer. The axle weights get a little higher and the brakes get a little bit bigger, but in general, it's pretty much straightforward, the same process. So I hope you found this helpful. Hopefully this will get to the bottom of my electrical short issue. I've got two things that could be causing it. It could be the magnets that are on the brakes that we just replaced. They are really old. I'm hoping that will do it. If not, in one of my next videos, I'm going to tackle the wiring on the axles and show you that next, and the challenges and the problems that that can cause as well. That's often a cause for the short circuit message I'm getting on my Prodigy brake controller. So that's it for today. Thanks for coming along, and until next time, do it yourself.